Mary, a university student, was looking for an extraordinary topic for her journalism project. She wanted to write about local legends and paranormal events because ordinary stories didn't excite her. During her research, she came across various rumors about an old and abandoned hospital located far from the city center. According to the rumors, the hospital had been shut down overnight, and no one had dared to enter since. Locals claimed to hear strange noises from inside and see eerie shadows in the windows. Although Mary wasn't entirely convinced by the stories, she thought the topic would make for an intriguing project. Determined to uncover the truth, she decided to visit the hospital. She packed a camera, a flashlight, and a notebook. But little did she know, this decision would change her life forever. In the darkness of the night, the journey to the hospital felt even more haunting. The narrow road winding through the forest was illuminated only by the headlights of her car. Mary thought she heard something shift in the back seat, even though the radio was off and she was alone. She glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. "I'm just imagining things," she muttered, continuing on. When she arrived, the hospital loomed massive and menacing in the darkness. Its walls were covered in moss, and most of its windows were shattered. She slung her bag over her shoulder and approached the rusty iron door. As she pushed it open, it creaked loudly, releasing a damp, decayed smell from inside. The first thing Mary noticed was the silence. As she stepped inside the hospital, even the sound of the wind outside seemed to disappear. She turned on her flashlight, illuminating an old, dusty reception desk. On the desk was a nameplate: Chief Doctor, Dr. Bill Cooper. Behind the reception desk, she saw patient files scattered across the floor. Picking one up, she read, "Patient, Stacy Cover, condition, critical." But the inside of the file was completely empty. As she moved her flashlight deeper into the room, she noticed a message on the wall, written in what looked like red liquid. "Find us." Suddenly, she heard a rustling sound behind her. She turned quickly but saw nothing. Pointing her flashlight to the floor, she spotted fresh, muddy footprints leading further down the hallway, but they abruptly stopped. Mary stopped where the footprints ended and took a deep breath. "Is this a prank?" she thought. But it wasn't a prank. Something was undoubtedly wrong here. She opened the door where the footprints had stopped. Inside, she found a massive operating room. The ceiling lights were rusted, and surgical tools were scattered everywhere. But what caught her attention was an old photograph sitting on the table. The photo showed a group of doctors and nurses. They all looked happy, smiling at the camera. But in the background, she noticed something unusual. A woman standing apart from the group, her black eyes and eerie smile making her stand out. This woman was different from the others. Her eyes seemed almost alive, staring directly out of the photograph. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. The cold air was sharp enough to freeze Mary's breath. She saw movement behind the table. "Who's there?" she shouted. There was no reply, but a few seconds later, she heard a whisper, "Don't leave us." As Mary tried to step back, the operating room door creaked shut. She was trapped inside. She reached for her phone, but there was no signal. Panicking, she leaned against the table and noticed an old journal among the scattered files. Inside it read, "Another experiment failed today. Dr. Cooper's instructions are too dangerous. The patients no longer behave like humans. My God, what have we done?" Her hands began to tremble. Were they talking about experiments? What had the doctors done in this hospital? As she continued reading, she discovered that the experiments had led to catastrophic results, and the test subjects became uncontrollable. At that moment, she felt something behind her. Turning around, she saw a faint figure emerging from the darkness. It was slowly approaching, but its features weren't fully visible. When Mary pointed her flashlight at it, the face became clear. It was the woman from the photograph. The woman stepped closer to Mary and whispered, "You woke us up." Suddenly, other shadows appeared in the room. Mary realized she was no longer alone. Mary thought she was escaping the hospital as she sped down the narrow road through the forest. Her eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, searching for any sign of movement. Was it real? She wondered, her breath unsteady and hands trembling. But then she noticed something strange. Although she was driving forward, the trees and road signs on either side of her looked exactly the same, as if she was stuck in a loop. When she glanced at her watch, she thought only a few minutes had passed, but her phone's clock showed 3 hours had gone by. Suddenly, the car's headlights flickered, and the engine sputtered to a halt. Mary hit the brakes, and silence engulfed the car. She reached for her phone, but the screen only displayed a single message: "Go back." Just then, she heard a rustling sound from the back seat. Turning around, she saw a shadow shifting in the darkness. Her heart nearly stopped. Then, the same whisper echoed through the car. "You can't leave us." Terrified, Mary stepped out of her car and noticed a faint light glowing through the trees. "No, I need to get out of here," she whispered to herself, but her legs seemed to carry her toward the light against her will. As she approached, she realized the light was coming from one of the hospital windows. But how had she ended up back there? She stood at the entrance, hesitating for a moment. She felt compelled to go inside, though she didn't know why. When she pushed the door open, the building looked different. The corridors weren't as decayed, the graffiti on the walls was gone, and the space seemed eerily intact. From the distance, she could hear the faint sound of a nurse's footsteps and the squeak of a gurney's wheels. Is time reversing itself? Mary thought, her fear giving way to confusion. She decided to move forward, and at the end of the hallway, a room caught her attention. The door was slightly ajar, and inside she could hear the sound of a baby crying. Mary approached the room and carefully pushed the door open. Inside, she saw an old-fashioned crib and a woman standing beside it. The woman had her back turned, looking down at the crib. Mary's flashlight trembled in her hand. "Hello? Is anyone there?" she called out. The woman suddenly turned around. It was the same woman from the photograph. Black eyes, a pale face, and that chilling smile. But this time, she was real. "We have to stay here," the woman said in a low voice. "And now, so do you." Mary screamed and stumbled backward, but the door slammed shut behind her. The woman's eyes began to glow, and a thick smoke filled the room. As Mary struggled to breathe, the walls around her revealed an old story, an explanation of the experiments conducted by the doctors. Mary had only one thought running through her mind: run. The lights in the room began to flash violently. The shadowy figure of the woman drew closer, and suddenly, the notebook on the table burst into flames. Mary bolted for the door, slamming her shoulder into it and tumbling into the corridor. As she ran, she could feel the breath of something sinister right behind her. The shadows on the walls leaned toward her, whispering and trying to stop her. Finally, she saw the exit. She reached out for the door, but it vanished before her eyes. In its place, a message appeared: "No escape. You are one of the lost souls now." Mary collapsed to her knees, burying her face in her hands. But then, a faint hum of an old generator echoed through the corridor. At the end of the hallway, a door opened by itself, spilling bright light into the darkness. Mary dashed toward it and threw herself into the light. Mary leapt into the light and opened her eyes to find herself in class. It was a dream, or so she hoped.